Welcome to Thriller Recaps. Today, I am explaining the movie, Call of the Wild, explaining every scene as it happens. Watch till the end, and please like, share and subscribe if you enjoy this. The movie starts with a narration by John Thornton. He talks about the Alaskan gold rush, where many people got caught up in the fever and went north to seek their fortune. These folks needed big dogs, so they could pull sleds. One of these dogs was Buck, who lived on a big estate in the US. Buck wasn't a house dog or a kennel dog. His owner was Judge Miller from Santa Clara County. Buck was like a king in the city because everyone knew he belonged to the judge. But Buck was a bit spoiled, noisy, and clumsy. One day, he was told to wake up his master, so he rushed into the house. The cooks panicked and started packing up the food to keep it safe from Buck. They shooed him out of the kitchen, and the judge had to drag Buck out of the house. He locked Buck outside and told him to behave. Buck tried to listen, but then he saw a bunny and chased after it into the woods. He didn't catch the bunny, so he returned home. When he got back, he found a feast prepared for a party. He ate it all, which made the judge very angry. The judge locked Buck outside to sleep on the porch, which wasn't unusual. While trying to sleep, Buck heard someone calling his name. He went to investigate, and was lured by a thief into a carriage. The thief took him away, leaving his collar behind. Buck was then taken on a ship by his new owners, where he was beaten into obedience. Buck knew he had no chance, but he wasn't ready to give up. Once, he tried to escape, but he stopped when he realized he was on a boat in the middle of nowhere. They reached Alaska, and Buck was far from home. At first, Buck was scared of the snow when they arrived in the snowy land. But soon, he was fascinated as a snowflake landed in his mouth. He even freed himself from his new master's leash. Buck met John Thornton for the first time when he returned his harmonica that had fallen out of his pocket. John thanked him, but then Buck was grabbed by his new owner with a rope around his neck. Buck was sold to Perrault, a man who worked for the Postal Service. Perrault's wife, Francois, complained that they needed 2 dogs when she saw Buck. Perrault said it didn't matter because Buck was a big dog. She thought Buck was too big and wouldn't make it. Buck was introduced to Spitz, who Perrault called Buck's new boss, and advised him to stay out of Spitz's way. Buck was introduced to the sled team and reluctantly joined them. They were to deliver mail 500 miles away. Work started immediately, and Buck found it tough to fit in on his first day. Perrault didn't get mad at him. Instead, he talked to him. They tried again, and Buck improved a bit but got tired easily. At night, Buck slept in the snow. He tried to sleep under a shed with Perrault and his wife, but he was sent out and told to sleep outside. John, in his narration, said Buck had learned to listen to the voices of men while living in their world. But that night, he would start to hear his own voice. Just then, Buck saw a huge black wolf. He got scared, woke up one of the dogs, and then realized there was no one there. He decided to go to sleep by digging a portion in the snow. The next day, work continued, and Buck was still as clumsy as before. Luckily, they managed to deliver the mail. At dinner that night, Buck watched as Spitz acted cruelly to another dog by taking his dinner, so Buck sacrificed his own. The following day, Buck woke up earlier than Spitz and didn't do as badly as he had before. Again, he saw Spitz refuse to let the other dogs have water, so Buck decided to create another source of water for them. Buck learned quickly and felt like he belonged to the pack now. A few days later, Buck saw his master and wife walking on frozen ice. He tried to join them but was stopped. Suddenly, Francois fell through the ice, and Buck rushed to save her before her husband could reach her. He managed to rescue her but drowned himself after bringing her to safety. His master tried to save him but realized Buck had saved himself. This made Perrault happy but made Spitz jealous. That night, Buck stayed with his master and wife by the fireplace. Francois teased Perrault for crying over a dog, but Perrault denied it and left them. She told Buck that her husband had never delivered mail on time in all his years, but he believed he would one day. She said her husband believed in Buck, and now she did too. Spitz watched this and became angrier. As Francois left, Buck saw a bunny and chased after it, followed by the rest of the pack. He caught up with it but let it go, and Spitz attacked it. Spitz had had enough and decided to fight Buck to establish his leadership. After a while, Buck found his strength and embraced his wild side represented by the big black wolf. He defeated Spitz and became the new leader of the pack. The rest of the pack watched, excited as their tails wagged in joy. Unable to accept his defeat, Spitz wandered off into the wild. The next day, Perrault noticed Spitz was gone and decided they would have to go on without him. Solix was asked to replace him, but Buck took the place instead. He was told to get in line, but he failed to listen or move, so he was pushed to the back and Solix to the front. However, Solix refused to wear the leash, so Buck was asked to lead. The dog seemed happy with this new arrangement. Perrault believed Buck couldn't lead the team, but Francois had faith in the dog. On their way, they were almost hit by an avalanche, but Buck smartly avoided it in his own way. For the first time in years, the team made their first ever on-time delivery. The town they stopped at was where John lived. After finding out John was in the town, Buck decided to stay around. John wrote a letter to his wife, talking about their dead son and telling her he was searching for a place where he could find some peace. He feared he would never find it, as he felt there was no home for him in the world. The next day, before Perrault and his wife were about to leave with their dogs, John ran out of his house, begging them not to go yet. Seeing John, Buck stopped and intentionally stalled for a while to allow John to hand the letter he had written to Perrault. Perrault seemed annoyed at this and didn't want to receive the letter at first. Buck collected it from John and handed it over to Francois. Before they left, John met Buck, showing he remembered him and thanked him. They left as the townspeople cheered for them. They kept making on-time deliveries, surprising those at the post office. That day, a letter addressed to Perrault was handed to him. As he went through the letter, his mood changed. He showed the letter to his wife, showing that they had been dismissed and told to sell the dog team and return to Quebec. The dogs were taken to where they would be sold off. The dogs began to protest, but Perrault tried to calm them down, telling them they had done nothing wrong. He specially told Buck that his sled had been dismissed due to the invention of the telegraph. He told him he had a mighty team ahead. Buck and the other dogs got sad as he watched Perrault and Francois leave. He had lost another master and had to become the leader until a new master came by. A few days later, the dogs were sold to Hal. He returned home with the dogs to Mercedes, who was more interested in gold. They were put in a sled and asked to pull Hal, Mercedes, and Charles, but they were unable to. John saw this and stopped Charles as he was about to hit Buck with a club. He then advised them on what to do before asking Hal where he was headed. Without being told, he realized Hal was after gold. He tried to stop them, realizing Hal's venture would render the dogs useless and might cause them to lose their lives. As they began their journey, Buck and the rest of the dogs, malnourished, began to lag. They were flogged by Charles. Realizing summer was coming earlier than expected, John tracked down Hal and his team, trying to stop them. When he catches up to them, he finds Buck has fainted and the rest of the dogs are malnourished. He is unable to dissuade Hal and his compatriots from abandoning their journey, but he is allowed to take Buck back to town with him while the rest of the dogs go with Hal. Buck regains consciousness and finds himself in John's house. He finds John outside and immediately remembers his team. He tries to look for them but is told they've gone with Hal. John tells Buck he's been asleep for 2 days in his bed. He then leaves, promising to be back, and tells Buck to do what he likes. Buck growls in pain. John goes to a bar where he finds Hal, who accuses John of sabotaging him, saying he has found no gold and lost all of his dogs in the wilderness. The townspeople hold both Hal and John, as Buck barges in to protect John. A gun is found on Hal, and he's thrown out of the bar. At home, Buck watches as John drinks alcohol. He then sees a picture of John's son. Buck takes John's alcohol and buries it in the snow despite being told to stop. After sobering up, John decides to tell Buck about his son. He tells him that after his son died, he and his wife grew apart, and he came to Alaska where he found Buck. The next morning, John shows Buck the map of the Yukon. His son was obsessed with the Yukon mountains and wanted to go off the map where no one had been. John decides to go with Buck to the Yukon. They find a canoe, and John and Buck sail the seas together. At night, John allows Buck to sleep with him in the tent. Other nights, Buck listens to his new master play the harmonica. On one of their journeys, they experience mild turbulence that causes a leak in their canoe. Meanwhile, Hal goes to John's home hoping to harm him but learns they've left. He finds the map showing where they were headed on John's floor and immediately begins to track them, thinking they're going for gold. John and Buck continue their journey on foot. They find a cabin in the woods and decide to settle there for the night. The cabin seems deserted and filled with rust. John finds liquor and is about to drink it but stops when he sees Buck staring at him. They clean out the cabin, and at night, Buck hears a noise that startles him. John tells him it's his ancestors, wolves. The next morning, John takes a bath in the river near his cabin and discovers that the river is filled with gold, so he starts panning. Buck finds a bigger piece but drops it when John doesn't look at him. While panning for gold, Buck looks across the mountains, curious about what might be there. Seeing this, John encourages him to explore. In the woods, Buck finds a bear and a female white wolf. The wolf sees him and scans him, eventually getting scared and running off. As it leaves, Buck notices his footprints, and those of the wolf look alike. He returns home to John, who again plays the harmonica at night. The next morning, John wakes up to discover that Buck isn't home. Buck had gone after the white wolf he'd seen earlier. While watching them, one of the pack members almost drowns, but Buck gets a tree and rescues it. This act of bravery causes the pack of wolves to treat Buck as one of them. Meanwhile, John writes in his journal that he's noticed a change in Buck and something is pulling him into the forest. Buck learns how to hunt with the wolves and even brings game home for John. John wonders if there's any house big enough to hold Buck and feels Buck is being led to his destiny through the journey. Buck spends all mornings with the wolves and at night stays with John, who tries to advise Buck to be careful as the world is a dangerous place. The following morning, John tells Buck he might buy himself a railroad. While the two try to play, Buck and John see the white wolf again. John comments that it's beautiful, and Buck leaves with her as they run into the woods. John tries to follow them and watches as Buck plays with the pack of wolves. John feels Buck had found his home, but he has traveled far from his. He returns home to pack his things and disposes some gold into the river and keeps some. Buck arrives at the scene, and John tells him it's time for him to return home. This news saddens Buck. John advises him not to come with him as he's got something there. He then tells him he'd be leaving in the morning and urges him to say his farewell. Buck returns to the wolves. On John's last night in the wilderness, Hal arrives after he had successfully tracked John and Buck and confronts him with a loaded rifle. The two struggle for it until Hal manages to shoot John in the leg and then demands the gold. John gives all the gold he had collected to Hal, but Hal won't be satisfied until both John and Buck are dead. Buck hears gunshots and rushes back to John. Hal tries to intimidate Buck with the club he had once used to beat him, but the dog overcomes his fear and grabs the club from Hal. Buck then pushes Hal into the burning cabin, and it immediately collapses. Buck goes to meet the wounded John. Buck smartly pulls John up and shows him his pictures and harmonica are safe. John promises Buck that it's okay as he's home. Days later, Buck now fully stays with the wolf pack. He and the white wolf have now become closer. At the ending of the movie, John says Buck had become the leader of the wolf pack and now has puppies with the white wolf. He says the wolves live without fear. He then assures us that Buck is a real dog and occasionally during the summer, he passes by the burnt cabin to remember John. Subscribe for more daily videos. Your support, likes, shares, and subscriptions mean a lot. See you in the next video.